I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand.
You know, there's good days and bad days, but there's a saying, it's a bad day in the field's better than a good day in the office. Today we're out here burning slash piles that were built over the summer of 2019 to reduce the fuel loading.
They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
We have over 3,500 piles in the backcountry here at Philmont, and so any opportunity we have to get out and burn them, we are trying to do that. And so today we burned about 345 piles out here. In 2018 we had the big Ute Park fire, and so we're trying to spread out the trees, get more space between them to prevent like those running crown fires, which will take out whole stands of timber.
It's just one of the things we do to make sure the ranch extends into perpetuity as long as we can. But until we reduce the amount of fuel on the ranch, we're always going to be looking down the barrel of the next catastrophic wildfire. So I am grateful to these crews and the scouts that help us.
I never do think to bring marshmallows until we're out here. I always think about it while the piles are burning, but not before.
I'll tell you a little bit about him. He has his Master of Science in Wildlife Biology from the University of Wyoming. He has a Bachelor of Science in 1994. I got that wrong. Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Management from New Mexico State University, and his Master's from the University of Wyoming. He is a certified wildlife biologist and the Philmont Director of Conservation. Please welcome Lee Hughes.
Thank you, Scott. That's a cool video that our News and Information Service did a couple years ago on the pile burning. Most of those folks aren't working there anymore. We're up to about 6,000 or 7,000 piles we have built. Anyway, this is the first time I've been to one of these. This presentation will probably be a little different than some others you're seeing. This is kind of an applied conservation roundup of things we've been doing since I've been at the ranch. And I got there on May 1st, 2019. My task was to, help post-Ute Park fire Philmont. And I thought, man, that sounds like a huge job, but it's Philmont. How can I say no? And then I got there, and then they threw in a pandemic and topped it off with a bankruptcy. And I'm like, can we just stop? That's enough crises for a minute. And then I really liked the Camp Tracy logo, but this one had a buffler on it. And buffler rhymes with muffler, as I always said in my fish camp tours. So I went with that one. So let's dive into this. In the Conservation Department, we do a lot. And apologize for this small type, but you'll be fine. You can read it. It's Dale Carnegie speaking schools and all that. I've never been. I just kind of talk. So there you go. Trails, campsites, all the recreational infrastructure has always been the bread and butter of the Conservation Department. There was a big flood in 1965 off the UU Bar down past Riata Lodge and Fish Camp that took out a Canyon Bottom Trail, and the need to create a new trail and to have that trail building knowledge was the origin of the Philmont Conservation Department in 1971. So trail, we still build a lot of trail, over 300 miles of hand-built trail. And we like to tell the scouts that's more miles of trail than highway miles between Cimerron and the Denver airport, where a lot of them come in from, just to lay out the scope of the work that has been done. all the bear security, the bear cables, bear boxes, the sumps, all that stuff's in our departments. The latrines, because everyone's got to poop. And then a lot of the spring work for water sources is in my department. We have the GIS shop in there, which is near and dear to my heart. I've been doing GIS for 30 years. Mentioned what many refer to as a Harvard of the West, New Mexico State University. I went there and learned me some GIS. We make all the maps Philmont uses, a lot of data collection and analysis, emergency response, search and rescues if an interagency management team comes to combat a fire, which we're always very nice to them, but I'm tired of seeing them. They generally show up with a big blank spot on the map that says, oh, here's where we can put, we can backburn through this empty country. And I say, that's not empty country, that's Philmont Scout Ranch. It's in all the papers, you may have heard of it. So I'll give them our data and they'll say, oh, wow, there's roads and trails and buildings and everything. And yeah, there really are. So that's good that we have that capability. And we've picked up a lot of drone work. Last summer, 2 of my GIS staffers were FAA 107 drone pilots, and you'll see the benefit of some of that coming up here. Then the environmental education part. Our roving outdoor conservation school is a 21-day trek that has 40 hours of work. It has some great enthusiasts. It's a heck of a good trek. We got the Trail Crew Trek, which is a 14-day trek, and these are reduced cost treks because there's a lot of sweat equity in there, and they're individual treks. Your troop's not coming that year, you're currently mad at all the people in your troop, whatever your reasons are, you can come out as an individual and make some new friends. And then the Order of the Aerial Trail Crew Trek, which isn't technically, it's in its own department. We can get a little clapping for the OA, you bet. But that's a great trek. We get a lot of staff members that are OATC alums. It's always well attended. The OA has a great ability to get the word out on these treks, more so than the Rocks and the Trail Crew Trek. But those are great experiences, and we work them all hard. Stream restoration has picked up a lot since I've come on. There's a lot of eroded and incised channels on Philmont for a variety of reasons, and we're focusing more on doing that. And I got a couple slides coming up on stream restoration. Our natural resources group, we probably have as much human bear interaction as any place on earth, I'm thinking. Great Smoky Mountains may have a few, but we got a lot of bears and a lot of campers, and we have a really good record. And part of it's from our natural resource team delivering that message, making sure folks are following protocols, chewing out the ones that need chewing out because they didn't think it was important. And then, there's rattlesnakes and bats and skunks and every other thing that they get to deal with. The invasive species management we do is out of that group. They prepare a lot of burn units for us. When we do some prescribed fire, they go out there and do the vegetation work and get the fire lines in place. And then we're rolling into hunting season now. So our natural resource manager, the full-time guy, is getting ready for our first antelope hunt. And then forestry. Big emphasis on forestry, and I will certainly touch on a lot of that. We're thinning fuels through a process we're calling restorative thinning. TSI, timber stand improvement, got batted around a lot before I got there, and I'm nitpicky because it's kind of my business. It's not a timber stand improvement. We're not managing for timber. We're trying to not burn the place up and restore the functioning ecology of these systems. We are starting reforestation next year in the Ute Park burn scar. We're excited about that. Hopefully to get a grant from Arbor Day Foundation that'll buy us some seedlings, and we'll have scouts out planting trees for the first time since Ute Park. Well, first large-scale planting at Philmont that I'm aware of. And then we got some research going on here and there. Philmont hadn't done a good job, I don't think, of partnering with universities and academic institutions, or anybody really. I mean, they did such a good job at such a unique type of business that they never got in the habit of partnering. But in my career coming up, partners and stakeholders, and just like all of us, it's how you are successful, how you measure success. So we're working on some more research projects too. And we do all that with a staff of 4 full-time. There's myself, there's our field manager who does the recreational infrastructure, trails and campsites, our forester, and then our natural resource manager who's officially Philmont's wildlife biologist. I don't have to be anymore. I can go feed a deer if I want to without feeling bad about it. And this summer we bring on 100 seasonal staff. Right now there's 26 undirected staff doing something at the ranch right now. Let's just assume it's good work. I think they're finishing up chainsaw training today. And in the winter we'll bring on another 16 to build trail in frozen ground because it's high adventure. And my intent oftentimes is to be funny, so if something sounds like it might be funny, just go ahead and laugh. It'll make me feel better about myself. So this is Philmont Scout Ranch, 140,177 acres in northeast New Mexico in Colfax County near the little town of Cimerron. I put a little mask around the edge just to highlight Philmont because that's the cool part, the important part. Donated by Wade Phillips, Oklahoma oil man. The first donation was in 1939, and it's on the unceded lands of the Pueblo and Hickory Apache tribes. And we reached out and we've been working well with the Hickory lately. Veronica Tiller, some other folks from the tribe have come out and helped. We had a big 50th anniversary of the Conservation Department in 2021, and she came out and keynoted that, and it was really interesting talking to her. And so far, over 1 million participants have hiked on the trails and had their lives changed by that Philmont magic. So when I talk about some of our bigger projects we're doing, we got at least 3 research projects going on. The one way up north at the old Metcalf Station area was a group out of Colorado State looking at avian response to post-catastrophic wildfires 20 years after the Poniel Complex fire. In central country, we got New Mexico Highlands and New Mexico State University and University of New Mexico looking at all the different things going into replanting following catastrophic wildfire, regenerating a ponderosa pine forest, and then including modeling what sites are ideal for that restoration. And you can imagine, we talked about, well, we haven't. I was listening to podcasts on the way up. That was me talking to myself. Y'all weren't there. But talk about severity, fire severity, and you know, it makes sense where the fire wasn't as severe proves to be a good site. There'll be a lot of gamble oak or something. There's still mycorrhizal associations going on in the soil. So we have, as we plant next year, we're going to be using that model to identify some of those better sites. And then down south, we're looking at a new one on Fowler Mesa, where we're going to get seeds from different locations of ponderosa pine. So a cardinal tenet of ecological restoration is keep your seed sources local. So we're kind of swimming upstream on that one, but with the changes we're seeing in climate, the local ponderosa pine don't seem to be enjoying it as much. So we'll get some California, some Arizona, maybe some Sierra Madre pines and plant a little orchard. No elk exclosures or anything, just those that survive and produce seed, we'll look at potentially using them going forward. And then our reforestation effort will be, do I got a little mouse action? Not quite. But over there where the tree is at. We're gonna plant some trees there. Hopefully we'll get about 20,000 trees in the ground, or no, 10,000 trees in the ground. We'll see. We're not going to plant in June. June is hot and dry in northeastern New Mexico. So that first month, the camper conservation. And if you don't know, every camper that comes through Philmont does 3 hours of conservation work to earn their arrowhead patch. So that's, 20,000 participants, that's 60,000 hours of conservation work. It's always been a lot of trail building, and continues to be, but they really do enjoy the forestry work, making piles, the stream restoration work, and I'm pretty sure they're going to enjoy planting trees too. But that first month they will be prepping sites for planting once the monsoons start in July and August. And they'll like it. They better, by golly. Stream restoration, like I said, is kind of new up north on the North Poneal Creek from Metcalf Station on down. There was a EPA 319 Clean Water, what the heck do they call that? Clean Water Act Section 319 grant projects. And those are incised channel things. And up north in the Metcalf Station, it was because of the railroad that came up that was logging timber to make railroad ties and mining ties. And those big grades will wreck the hydrology of a canyon, go figure. So we put in some structures up there. The one down further south is in Bonito Canyon. And I got pictures of that coming up. It's a big high mountain fen. It's actually a peat system, saturated meadow that was formed from an old lava plug from even before my really old forester was born. So it was old. If you knew Marty, if he was here griping about it, it would be funnier. But he's at least 10 years older than me. I asked him how it was being Lord Baden-Powell's patrol leader, and he won't talk to me anymore. And then we're starting a new one in base camp. If you've driven to Philmont, and as you're coming in towards administration, there's this dry, incised ditch. That's the Cimerron Creek. It should be better. It's always bugged me that it's not better. It's the first thing you see coming to Philmont, and it flows right behind my house, and hopes are there will be a trout lurking behind my garage before I retire, and I'll introduce myself to him. And then finally, in the south central country, there is our restorative thinning that I will go on ad nauseum about. So starting now, this is our stream restoration situation. This is in Lower Bonito Canyon in the Beaubien area. This is the big meadow that extends down from Beaubien, if you've been there. It's not supposed to, well, all right, that's a value judgment. We're not used to it looking like that. Arroyos in the southwest, eroded ditches, they're not all anthropogenic in origin. It's just that country responds to water flow with erosive activity. In this particular instance, though, I think this is pretty well self-inflicted between the roads we put in the bottom and the grazing we've done. So our goal then is to restore that water table back up to the original level of that entire meadow system that, as you can see, has been eroded. They do that putting in beaver dam analogs, which is part of a low-tech process-based restoration that Utah State University up there in Logan is leading the charge on. Kids really like playing in the mud a whole lot. And it's good. That's my favorite part of this job. I do not worry about the future of America because I see how hard these kids work. The whole notion that this generation and whatever insult you want to throw in after it, I ain't buying it. We're okay. Granted, we get a small population, subpopulation of the entire U.S., but by God, they're no different than the ones that read this book. They still want to get in the mud. They want to do things, and we are kind of the department of doing things. So that's a bit of an aside. Back, beaver dam analogs. The beaver dam analogs will capture sediment as they flow through because it'll slow the water, and slower moving water carries less sediment material. So it'll settle out, and eventually that stream grade will restore. And there's, it's a peat bog. If we ever want to do Philmont branded scotch, we have an option there. We're not there yet. We got through bankruptcy without it. We're probably not going there yet. And then some Zuni bowls, and then diversions where we do have small streamlets and we want to water the entire valley bottom. And then some monitoring with that as well because of the 319 grant, but also because we want to know what's going on. Now you're thinking to yourself, Lee, because that's my name, what is the Zuni bowl you mentioned? Well, I'm glad you asked. So Zuni bowl, it's a Bill Zedike thing. Bill Zedike's kind of the guru of riparian area restoration in New Mexico. And this is a small one they did. What the Zuni bowl does, it armors where you have a head cut. So whenever you got incision going upstream and it looks like a pretty waterfall, oh, I love waterfalls. No, you don't. That's a head cut. What this does is it just armors that, it arrests that erosion going up. It armors a plunge pool coming down, then you can put one rock dams below that, and in the overall restoration, that just is a placeholder until you get that grade build back up. So yeah, putting rocks in a muddy creek, again, high, fun, the best you can do. So that's stream restoration. I'm pleased that we're picking up on that. 2 319 grants, and we got a New Mexico State I can't remember what they call it, River Stewardship Grant is what it is. But a big focus on what we're doing is wildfire. Historically, there's always been fires in that country. There's always been fires in the West. A lot of it is, especially in New Mexico, is lightning caused. I think we're second in the continental U.S. for lightning strikes behind Florida. And a lot of them happen without rain. And then there's a lot of anthropogenic fire starts as well. But there's a history of fire. And these are typically low intensity fires. I mean, things will happen. A tree may get struck by lightning that will catch on fire, and then it'll catch the grass on fire and dissipate that energy. And then it's just kind of done. But with fire suppression, things have changed. And you know, grazing was a big part of that. Sheep and cattle coming in, eating all the grass. The first thing that does is eliminate that fire's ability to spread. So those trees are still getting struck by lightning, and they may drop, and where a fire would have started, it does not, because there's no grass now to carry the fuel. So that means all the regeneration, all the young trees now are not being top killed by fire. And so they just grow up and become overstocked because that natural disturbance is no longer there. Then after the 1910, the big burn, all that Northern Rockies stuff that Gifford Pinchot and Charles Pulaski and Teddy Roosevelt and that whole Justice League of superheroes doing their thing back then, you know, 25 years later turned into that 10 a.m. rule when the recognition of the vast expanse of forest in the U.S. was a heck of a resource. That rule was any fire start had to be out by 10 a.m. the next day. And then our pal Smokey Bear out of Lincoln National Forest, and I just learned this morning that Philmont is a recipient of a Golden Smokey. And now my quest is, where is that statue? Because I can see some hijinks coming from that if we ever find it. Anyhow, Smokey Bear did a heck of a job with fire prevention, but to this day, every fire that starts by law has to go out. The New Mexico Forestry Division will come and put out a fire unless we've identified on an area on a map as a fire management area, which we haven't done yet. But if we did have designation, then with a lightning caused fire, we have the option of letting it go. If conditions are right, and it would be weather that we would do a prescribed burn in, we already got to start. Let's see what this fire does before we just go put it out. And then also there's management. You know, I mentioned the railroads that came in, the Cimerron Northwestern Railway and some others. They would go up a canyon, lay trail, cut it all, make ties for the mining activity up in Baldy country. And then they would pull those tracks up and go up another canyon, and you just keep doing that over and over. And so that resulted in second and third growth. Then benign neglect is the phrase my forester brought with him from Alaska that I like. You know, what Philmont pays attention to, it does as well as anybody in the world, I think. 140,000 acres, good luck finding a piece of trash out there anywhere because they're focused on that. The program is world class, but they never really paid attention to the forest. It was just always the backdrop. It was the matrix where we had our high adventure. So it wasn't bad management. It wasn't conscious decisions to make the forest in bad shape. It was just benign neglect. And now it's time to undo that. And it turned into what the federal government's called a wildfire crisis strategy. And I'll touch on that some too, but the problem's gotten so large that it's gotten attention even on the East Coast. And there's kind of an example of why. This is, as of 2022 data, that Philmont wildfire hazard potential. My guess is in the central country it's not as red because there's no fuel left now, but that red is bad. You may have noticed in society red generally means scary and bad. It does here too. The whole thing is really, it is fuel rich, I'll put it that way. And we've seen it happen. So Philmont would be up in here, that's Baldwin. That's the highway through the canyon, Cimerron right there. But Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon, you may have heard of that. That's now the largest fire in New Mexico, almost hit 400,000 acres. Those were both Forest Service activities that went awry. So it's not a good time to be a Forest Service employee in New Mexico. It's kind of a little better, but for a while there, it was kind of sketchy. But the conditions are just nuts. You know, we'll get humidity well below 10%. I did a lot of work in Missouri, state of Missouri, a lot of prescribed fire, and we start getting nervous when relative humidity dropped down to 30. It's like, I don't know, man, it's getting kind of dry. Keep your eyes out, boys. And I go to Mexico and get my little Kestrel, and it's reading 2, and I'm like, that's not even a real number, stop it. But yeah, it does, it gets dry there. 45-mile-an-hour sustained winds, gusting to 75. The POI is probability of ignition. What's that fuel bed? If it receives an ember, what's the likelihood it's going to catch? So we end up with these, and then red flag conditions. We were in red flag around here yesterday. I'm not sure if we are today. Normally you'll get red flag conditions as a combination of humidity and fuel moisture and wind speed. That when conditions are right for fire spread, they'll issue a red flag warning for the area. And then it goes away at night because you always get humidity recovery at night once the sun goes down. Well, we weren't even getting that. For like 76 straight hours, we had red flag conditions, and fires are just raging, picking up pine cones in the wind and blowing it 2 or 3 miles ahead and starting a new fire. Because all of our forests are overstocked, and there's a lot of ladder fuels, a lot of small trees, junipers and pinon and or regeneration of the ponderosas and firs that carry that fire from the grasses up into the canopy, and then off it goes. And that turns into situations like the Ute Park fire that, you know, anyone that loved Philmont, that was a rough 2018 in May, watching the reports of this fire just increasing. And it's about 26,000 acres on Philmont. Well, I'll touch on that in just a bit. Then that wildfire crisis strategy, I mentioned that. There's this enchanted circle priority landscape. So the State of Mexico Forestry Division and their state forestry action plan identified those opportunity areas throughout the state where management would do the greatest good. And then when the Forest Service was looking for sites to put funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, they went to these priority landscapes, and one of them chosen is on us. We haven't, I don't know if we'll see funding for that. I can't even get an answer if that funding's just for federal lands or if it can be used on private as well. But the recognition is there. Us and all of our neighbors have some work to do. So you're thinking to yourself, Lee, what's the deal? How did it get that way? And this is simple, but when you have fire coming through at the interval with which these ecosystems evolved, it's a maintenance thing, you know, like cutting your hair, trimming your fingernails, mowing your lawn. It just keeps things the way it ought to be. But when you get out of that system, when you add fire exclusion, like coming off at 4 o'clock there, you get more trees coming in. And then you can run a fire through it and go back to the inner loop. But if you don't, it just keeps getting thicker and thicker to where you need mechanical intervention to restore that structure so you can run fire through it again or let fire go through it. And then we're in that little offshoot there where high severity stand replacement fire occurs because the system is no longer receptive to fire. It's just a giant fuel bed. And another way, from some other graphic I poached, this is showing theoretically a 20-year fire return interval. I think ponderosa woodlands can burn quicker than that, but the fire will maintain that structure, and then the lower right is what happens when you take fire out. Just all that regen grows and turns into trees, and it's a leap for the sunlight at the top of the canopy. And that's what happened to us. So in 2002 was the Poneal Complex fire that burned the north part of the ranch and the Valladolid unit of the Carson National Forest. At the time was the largest wildfire in the state of Mexico, and almost 29,000 acres on Philmont. They didn't close the ranch after that one. They just kept going. There were some reforestation efforts there in May and June, but it was too early. We weren't getting rain on the seedlings, and that really didn't work very well. Then 2018 came the Ute Park fire, which is 26,000 acres on Philmont. The little town of Ute Park's there in the middle of the slide. If you go to the little town of Ute Park, they call it the Philmont fire, but the rest of the world calls it the Ute Park fire because it started in Ute Park, for those of y'all keeping score at home. That was burning 1,000 acres an hour. Like the first 24 hours had 24,000 acres burned. It was more so in the Poneal Complex, kind of the first modern era wildfire that Philmont saw, where the fire behavior is just far beyond what anyone was accustomed to seeing in wildfires in the West. And then a little one down south too popped up later that year. The Morris Creek fire got about 300 acres down towards Rayado Canyon and went out. That's the one that really got everyone's attention. Philmont closed that year for the first time ever because there was talk, I wasn't there yet, I came right after this, but how to route itineraries with this giant hole right in the middle of the ranch, and finally they just said we can't safely do this. And then in 2022 was the Cooks Peak fire, started on Easter Sunday south of the ranch, and had some of that extreme weather, came up. This is the one that burned up Zastro cabin, the home of Philmont's Wood Badge program. And I was down there dropping trees as fast as I could to try to prevent that from happening, but I like Zastro, but my self-preservation instincts kicked in and I left. So that's unfortunate. That's another 3,000 acres that burned on us. So obviously then it was a time for action. Something had to be done. The very first full-time director of conservation, a guy named John Selly, left in December of 18, or January 19, to do some work up in Wisconsin, and that provided the opportunity for me to come. And the idea was that I would help this not happen again. And so the way I know to do it is fire is fire. It's just a physiochemical thing. It's just fire, and it'll burn based on the fuel you give it. So if you give it less fuel, it'll be lower intensity. In that 2018 Ute Park fire, all the staff that was hired, they were already on site. This was a late May fire, the Ute Park was. So they gave them an opportunity saying, that's, okay, keep that thought. We had staff create this shaded fuel break, which is a fuel break with trees. It's like a shelter wood cut if you're a forestry type, but we just space the trees out so that the canopies aren't touching, less likelihood of a crown fire coming from it. And then we take out some of the ladder fuels. Lots of scouts, lots of volunteers helped to pile the slash that our sawyers cut, and we put 300,000 man hours into this shaded fuel break. But in 2018 post-fire, step one is buy every chainsaw you can get your hands on. So I think we bought out every steel dealership within 3 states, and we got a lot of chainsaws. We took all the staff, they were given an option. Summer's not gonna operate. You can leave, do something else for your summer, no harm, no foul. If you wanna stay, we'll keep you under contract and you're gonna help us thin trees. So a huge effort to get the S212 wildland power saws course and train everyone in chainsaw use and safety. Closed the ranch, throw everyone out there, start cutting trees, and continue that for about 3.5 years. And we end up with, you'll see a little orange line at the bottom part of the ranch. That's along Beaubien Road, which is our main thoroughfare in and out of our South Country. And one thing that became apparent in the Ute Park fire, you can see that hash mark in the middle, we don't really have a good way to deal with getting people out in the South Country in an event, so we wanted to armor this road a little bit. And then we went to a prescription that was 5 chains on either side of the road, and who knows how long a chain is. 66 feet is what you were thinking, and you were about to say that and you would have been right. So it's a forester metric. So if you didn't doubt foresters yet, you can now, because 66 feet, that's weird. They just make that up. Wildlife biologists and foresters don't always see eye to eye. I don't know if you're picking up on that. They're wrong, wildlife biologists are right. But anyhow, we did this thing, so it's 660 feet wide little fuel break, and from this aerial image, that green line is the polygon that we sent there's my house going now. We had those in like 2 to 3 acre units, and they would cut that, and you can see the results. This would have been in 2022, but you can see from the aerial image where it was thin versus where it wasn't. And man, just huge amounts of work. Good thing about Boy Scouts is you always got Boy Scouts. And again, they just love doing things. Given an opportunity to do things, they will do it. Our sawyers like cutting trees with chainsaws. They don't like hauling slash. So slash is what's left after you cut a tree. What I tell my staff when I'm saw training is the hardest part about murdering a tree is hiding the body, because trees are big. But if you have a bunch of scouts, then by God, they'll make piles for you. These are some of our log cabin piles like we built at Apache Springs and Beaubien. And then we'd have fill break. We got the Philmont Staff Association has some volunteer opportunities that they can come back and work with us. And these are them building some gumdrop type piles, probably around Crater Lake Miners Park somewhere. Let me make sure I've got all of that. So I mentioned before, if those people that are always dismissing Generation X, Y, Z, I'm not very good on those teams, but they are there and they want to work and they want to do things. They just need a place to guide them so they can try doing things, and then they can safely fail, and then we can safely pull them back from that failure and move on. It's amazing what you can do, and I remind my people all the time, you're not going to break Philmont. Just people have been trying for over 80 years. You're not going to be the one to do it. So it's a go out there and try things. And then you saw from that video, once we get these piles built, and we're over 6,000 piles now, and we've probably burned 3,000 or 4,000 of them. Snow comes, it's pile burn day. And pile burn, that's a good day. It's all smiles and enthusiasm. As you start, you get your right humidity and wind speed and fuel moisture and enough snow, and you're out there just loving life, and you take big dramatic photos as things go. We spend a lot of time chunking our piles, we call it. So after they're lit, we'll go back in with tools and push all the unburned stuff back in. So we'll get that 8-10 foot diameter burn scar pocked on the ground, but it's better than 28,000 acres of that. So it's a lot of work. And then at the end of the day, you know, you're just tired, worn plumb smooth. And that's when the news and information guy decides to take your picture and post that. It's like, no, man, I was working all day. I swear to God I was.
Lee, you were probably waiting on, so where's the beer? It's like, okay.
I was directing. You can't tell from that picture. I was probably reaching for a phone to send an important message or something. I don't know. But anyhow, that's our little fuel break. But when we look at the conditions that are happening, where it's spotting 2 or 3 miles ahead, 660 feet is not going to buy you what you want out of a fuel break. A fuel break's, a lot of the techniques that have arisen in wildland firefighting and prescribed fire just almost don't apply anymore with these new conditions we're dealing with. So we knew something had to be different. The idea of a fire break is safe egress out of there and a good place to mount a defense. Like they could back burn off that fire line into the approaching flaming front and remove the fuel that way. But it still ain't quite enough. So the metric had to change. We had to scale up. In the best year of our hand-thin shaded fuel break, we'd get less than 100 acres treated. It would take 2 or 3 days to treat an acre, to cut the trees, get them processed, build piles, and get that fuel mitigated. And that's not going to get the job done. We need more and we need faster. So that pace of that treatment had to be increased significantly, and which meant mechanical thinning. We had to go out and get big yellow machines because that's how you get a lot of work done quick. But we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. It's Philmont Scout Ranch, for goodness sakes. This is not a place to do things wrong. So we want to make sure we had the right prescription for what we're going to do going forward. You know, you look at wildfire mitigation in the literature, obviously fuel mitigation, removing trees is the right thing, but what is the right prescription for Philmont? So as always, you go back big picture first. There's a little crosshair down there in New Mexico. That's Philmont. We're up here currently at Camp Tracy. This is high-grade GIS is what you're getting here. If you're getting goosebumps right now, I understand. But I just want to go back and look at the big picture. So in continental U.S., the prevailing winds are kind of westward. They come in off the Pacific, push across the continent, moisture-laden, you know, Cascades, Oregon, all that, temperate rainforest type stuff. And then that moist air comes and it starts hitting the Rockies, and that's where it all kind of falls apart. They can't get over that hurdle, and it creates a rain shadow. So you see from eastern Colorado, New Mexico, well, just east of the Rockies on, it's all grassland, right? Because what that rain shadow does, it takes the moisture out of that prevailing west wind, and lack of moisture results in not enough precip to grow woody materials. So right at Cimerron and Front Range, it's short grass prairie. All it can grow is buffalo grass and grama and a few other things. Plants adapted to that high fire return interval and low precipitation way of being. And then as you move around the 100th meridian through Kansas, you're starting to get more moisture, and that turns into tall grass prairie. You can grow some big blue stem and Indian grass and some other things. But it's not until you're getting into the Midwest there with some river breaks and some other things that are finally mitigating the effects of that rain shadow where you start seeing trees come in. And then when you get the effect of the Atlantic seaboard, you get more big forests out there too. So just a concept that topography and how the land lays plays a big role in what vegetation is there. So when I'm coming up as an early land manager, I got introduced to this concept of natural communities. So a natural community is that assemblage of plants and animals that will happen on the landscape where conditions are similar. Anytime you have the same slope, aspect, elevation, precip, soil type, in the absence of human influence, you will get these natural communities. And it's a biotic representation of the abiotic conditions on the ground. And it makes a lot of sense to me. You know, when I first started working in land management, one of the first things I had to do was invasive species treatment. Because biologists in the 70s were looking at habitat. What are the habitat components to grow these game species that we highly value? And then they started looking at plants. It's like, well, we got this native legume, Lespedeza, that makes some seeds that the quail like, but there's this one in Eurasia that makes 1,000 times as many seeds, and you can't kill it on a dare. Let's plant that everywhere. And it did that everywhere. And it wasn't the right move, I don't think. What made me think of that? Doesn't matter. I'm just griping, I guess. But, and thinking back of that picture of the continental U.S., you know, you're going to have natural community types, like where there's frequent fire intervals, annual or every couple of 3 years, and it's flat, you know, you're going to wind up with a prairie. Where that fire tends to peter out a little bit, you'll start getting more woody material, and it may become a savanna, and eventually you get to where the fire exclusion and the water availability results in a forest. And these are slides I cribbed from Missouri, so they're oak trees and not pine, but use your imagination. And then elevation plays into it too. Up at the top of the mountain is going to be a spruce fir, aspen type system that doesn't see fire very much. Every 100 to 300 years will it see fire traditionally. You know, climate change, I'm not sure, we'll see. But that's a system where once fire sweeps through there, all the spruce and fir will be burned up. It's a standing replacement fire. The aspen that's been sitting there waiting now has black soil, warmed by the sun, lots of sunlight, and the aspen, if you're quiet, you can hear them do that. They pop up, and then they rule the roost for about 80, 100 years, and then they drop out, and the spruce and fir are back by then. So when you're cruising around in fall looking at aspen glow type stuff, you're usually seeing the outline of old wildfires where they have come through. Move down the ridge a little bit, you're getting some mixed conifer, Doug fir, white fir type stuff that generally doesn't burn a whole lot. And then you get down to Ponderosa Belt, which is very much a fire-adapted community. And then you go on your pinyon juniper shrubland, and then eventually you're level looking at prairie situations. I thought I added this slide in there, but maybe not. So you're asking yourself, Lee, because that's who I am, what is a ponderosa woodland? Well, I'm glad you asked. That means you're paying attention. So woodlands are highly variable. In Missouri, they had this concept of forest, woodland, savanna, grassland, and in that way of thinking, woodland generally referred to a more pirate community, a more fire-adapted community than a true forest that would have like spring ephemerals, things that are all shade tolerant and fire intolerant. Start going in the woodland world, everything there has a bit of a component to fire to it. The canopy tends to be spread out. There's a lot of sunlight on the ground that generates a rich herbaceous understory. They are fire adapted. Trees, if you give them room to grow, they'll have these giant spreading crowns, wolfy trees we call them. They're pretty cool. And then a good diverse herbaceous layer because of the sunlight on the ground. And then it tends to be kind of that shortgrass prairie component underneath our ponderosa. It'll be black grama, blue grama, hairy grama. There'll be some liatris, I can't shoot, pretty flowers is what I'm getting at. It's real nice. People take pictures. And then the aspect has a lot to do with it. This is a slide I thought I noted. And I added this slide because I came up West Slope from Philmont. I went to Taos and then up Durango on the West Slope of the Rockies in Colorado, and out to the Great Basin, out to here. And there's this notion of protected and exposed slopes. I don't know if you've been introduced to the concept, but you've seen areas after a snowfall. And the day after a snowfall, or in South Texas, an hour after a snowfall, there'll be patches that remain and patches that melt. It'll remain on the north and east slopes because those are the protected slopes. You get the morning sun, it stays a little moister, and then you get that south and west exposure that's harsh, and it'll melt that snow quicker. So coming up on the west slope, knowing that the rain shadow extends on the east side of the Rockies, you get more moisture on the west slope, but it's also exposed and hotter and drier. So it was noticeable to me how much more woody vegetation is on the west slope. At the same time, it's a harsh, thin soil environment. It's just tough country on that west slope. That's why it's rough country. I'll just say that. It made sense to me on a 12-hour drive yesterday to add the slide at 10 o'clock last night. I guess I thought there'd be more on this slide than what actually just came out, so moving on. Well, there you go. I'll just explain what I said in animated text. Go 1980s. Anyway, ponderosa pine is what we decided to focus on. We knew that we had to reduce fuel. We knew we wanted to do it in a way that was commensurate with Philmont and everything it is, so we're focusing on the ponderosa pine. Obviously, where the burn scars are, there is not as much ponderosa pine as there used to be. This is, I think, from National Land Cover Database data pre-Ute Park fire. So if you look at the northern part in the Ponyo complex, you can see the white areas that are void of trees. There used to be plenty of ponderosas there. This is pre-Ute Park fire. That area is now also a blank part of the map. But this is the extent of our fire-adapted program area. We do a lot of program in the ponderosa, and it responds to the type of thinning we're thinking about doing. So this is where we're thinking about working. We got actually we're up to like 24,000 acres we have identified as treatment units. There's a little bit going up to the northwest that's not in ponderosa pine, but that is the Black Mountain North Fork Uraka drainage, and that watershed feeds right into the Philmont Reservoir that supplies base camp with water. And during the summer, I think we're the 17th largest municipality in New Mexico with all the bodies we have there, so it's important we protect that water supply. You may notice through the hillshade that it's steep country. If you've been to Philmont, you know it's steep and rugged, and logging on steep ground is hard. Traditionally, you do a highline type operation. You got a dozen guys out there working, and as the sawyers are cutting trees, that cable can come down, pick those trees up, skid them up to the mountain to a landing, and then take the logs off to the mill. And it's kind of rough on the landscape. It's dangerous work. There's a lot that can go wrong. We weren't super excited about doing that, but we also knew we had to do steep country. But then we found this outfit that runs these machines out of Finland called Ponce. This is a Ponce Bear. It's a harvester. And you may notice with your keen eyes there is a Herzog synchro winch on the back, and you're thinking to yourself, man, it's been a long time since I've seen a Herzog synchro winch in a PowerPoint presentation. And you're not wrong. But what that thing does, so tracks will go on these. This is just off the lowboy, but they'll put tracks on it before they go in the woods, and they can go up to 80% slope logging. And they'll take this winch and tie it off at the top of a slope. And as they're working up and down the hillside, that boom is 35-foot reach, so they can treat 70 feet on one run. If they ever get to where the tracks would slip, that's when the winch kicks in. It synchronizes the transmission. It doesn't pull it up or down the mountain. It just prevents those tracks from slipping. And as they're going vertically up and down the fall line, the treads in the track are actually horizontal to the slope, so it's like little tiny water bars all the way up. It's the least soil impactful type of restoration work I've ever seen happen. It ain't cheap, but it does have a Herzog synchro winch on it. And this is what it looks like when it goes. So we're doing, cut the tree. There's a saw blade, a 30-inch saw blade at the bottom. They'll run the trees through the processing head, removing the branches, and then they'll cut it at a certain length. This is called CTL, cut to length treatments. We know what the mill wants. We can measure species, diameter, taper, length, everything with that machine and pre-sort the logs before the forwarder picks them up. Now the forwarder is the Ponce Elephant King, and it looks a lot like that, but it has bunks on the back. So they can both use the harvester will come down and harvest. If there's a lot of duck fur and everything else in there, it'll paint a code on there, so when the forwarder comes down, it can pre-sort into the bunks and take them up to a landing, and it just makes the process more efficient. Another thing we do is after those branches come off, we have them stack those branches on the path in front of them. So they're moving up and down, but they're crushing those branches into the soil to reduce some of that compaction, get some of those nutrients back in the soil, and give us a fuel bed for the first prescribed fire we run through there. Because the other thing about taking the canopy off your forest and putting sunlight on the ground is things are going to start growing fast. So if you just stand it out and walk away, you're going to end up with a hairier mess than you started with. And we knew also it's been shaded for so long that there wouldn't be grass response initially to carry fire. So we thought the slash would help, but actually when ponderosas grow that tight, they don't have that many branches, turns out. So the slash we generated was nowhere near what we thought it would be or what we feared it would be. We had imagined waist-high slash all over the ranch. Fortunately, that didn't happen. It may be problematic come prescribed fire time. But this is when we started. This is April of 2023, and that is pretty much pre-treatment area. You can't see through that forest. I had a manager in Missouri, Larry. Larry was a piece of work, and he had a dead cat index, and he'd come up. You know, you can't throw a dead cat more than 20 feet in those woods before you hit a tree. So that's low dead cat index. When you thin it out, you want that dead cat to fly quite a ways. You know, ecology is a weird thing all the way around. And then you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish I knew what it looked like inside the cab when one of these things are running. Well, your buddy Lee here is to hook you up with this. This is my buddy Miguel. We like Miguel. But he's going to go find a tree, and then it's just two video game controllers, two guys. This operator and the forward operator can do the work of all the dozen people that would have done that highline stuff. We do a prescription by description. This is my forester Marty in the back shooting this video. We work with operators, tell them what we want for desired future conditions, so we're not out there painting every tree. They get the feel for what we want, and then you can tell as he's stripping it, you'll hear a beep. There you go, right there. That tells the computer telling them that is at length for that particular sale for that mill. We do sell the trees we cut. Philmont retains ownership of them. It's a money-losing proposition. I'll talk more about that some, but it's just cool. I'm dorky enough that I like technology like that. The beep tells you what to do. So this is where we've been working. If you're familiar with the area, safety first. Safety moment, watch your cords, everyone. There, I checked that box. This is the meadow at Miners Park, if you've ever been there. Climbing areas up here. This is the road that goes up towards Crater Lake. This camps over this way. You can see where we did our hand thinning, just for reference. Then we came in with a machine, and I mentioned my GIS staff were a bunch of drone pilots. They went in and flew it, and I laid their orthomosaic on top. So we have thinned to date 771 acres since April of 23. Should be about 1,500 acres, but I'll take 771. Then a little close-up of treated versus untreated. I see a little bit of where their paths went on the machines. There's impact, but still the lowest impact I've ever seen for this heavy of a thinning that we're doing. And you're thinking, holy smokes, you guys went nuts on that a little bit. And we do a basal area thing. It's a basal area reduction. So basal area is a measure of the square feet of an acre of land occupied by tree trunk. And you measure with these little prisms, or you can use your thumb, but we are cutting between 30 and 50 basal area is what we want left. We're starting at 180 or more basal area. So we're taking out more than 2/3 of the trees. But when you get in ground level and look through, it's not quite as severe as it looks from straight above, especially in comparison to the untreated forest. And another view of that, you can see a path going right down the middle of the picture. So I first came to Philmont in 1978, and with the age of the staff I have, I just say late in the last century because they just blink out when you say 1978. But when they first started, and we got about 10 or 15 acres treated, enough that I could go stand in the middle of it, I did that because I'm Director of Conservation at Philmont. I could do cool stuff like that. And the very first memory I had was like being 14 at Philmont and recognizing that structure that I hadn't seen since then. It's like 40, 50 years of unchecked growth is what we're knocking back with this process. And that meant a lot to me because I wanted that reference point. And there was one. Yes?
So in that scene, you know, they say back in pioneer days, you used to be able to ride a horse in a full gallop through the forest.
Or a dead cat.
Right.
Yeah, same thing. The full gallop horse is a more romantic metric by far, yes. But yeah, you can fling a dead cat, a big one, a long way through there. But you know, you're right. That is the pirate community. Every natural community has a natural disturbance. With ponderosa pine, it's fire. With a pirate or a riparian system, it's going to be spring floods, snow melt floods. Are going to be that disturbance that keeps it going. So you can't have the entire community without the disturbance in there. And then the GIS guys, I promise I'd throw this in. They picked the music, but it shows the thinning. It's pretty cool. And any second now, you're going to be, there you go. So Miners Park, climbing rocks at the top of the scene. This is flowing in June, and we cut that hillside starting in January, so it hasn't had a chance to green up yet. That's some of the steeper areas they're able to hit on the road up towards Crater Lake. That's a big difference. That's the meadow at Miners Park, if you've ever been up there. We left the camp proper because summer was coming on. We're gonna go back this fall and thin right at Miners Park into camp. Again, another shot of the steep areas. A lot of logs coming out. Ridiculous amounts of logs coming out. When they first started, they were kind of doing things real uniform, made it look like a plantation. We didn't want that. We wanted it more organic. We're a little more clumpy and groupy now. That's an intense amount of effort on the landscape with, in my opinion, minimal impact to the soil underneath, which makes me feel better about it. There's some broken eggs in the omelet, but still, it's an omelet. And it's a saying, so it's gotta be good. So this mentions when we sell the logs, we take the income from the sale of logs to the mills, put them into treating additional acres. But we've also learned, and my GIS crew, they're pretty cool. So I tell them the room was quiet until the end, and then there was this giant ovation. And when they asked, yeah. Good, now I'm not a liar. Excellent. That happens to be the very first stump that was cut on April 14th, 2023 by a machine, 9:14 a.m. So obviously fuel reduction is key. We want to make the landscape receptive to fire. It can spot 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, I don't care. Pine cone falls into that thinned area, do your worst. Well, no, I take that back. It should reduce the intensity of the fire. I sure hope it will. So the whole landscape's there. We don't need just a fire break. Should have more water available. Each one of those tree stems is evapotranspirating a huge amount of water. So less straws in the bowl should restore our water table some. Hopefully we'll see some creeks and springs flow that hadn't in a while. And ecologically, we're going to get a more diverse ground layer that's going to produce more invertebrates, it's going to feed more critters. That habitat type has been lacking, that open understory, so our woodpeckers, cavity nesters finally have some habitat they can hang out in. Our roads are not up to this. It's been a big issue. Log trucks are different than pickups and UTVs and everything else you normally use in a camp. We've quickly found that our road system doesn't work. Roads are expensive, so now we're talking about using log receipts to do some road work instead. And our main thing is funding is the issue. This is expensive. It's about $2,500 an acre, and that's I love the BSA price. It'd probably be about $3,500 or $3,700 an acre. But it's expensive. So the state has a Forest and Watershed Restoration Act, a FALRA, and with federal funding coming in on that, that's what we're operating on now. We used $1 million from the Ute Park Fire Fund to do the Miners Park area, but it's the pace of funding that slows us up. If we had $60 million, we would go to town on it. A pair of those machines, I didn't mention, the harvester and the forwarder can treat about 2 to 2.5 acres a day. And so end of June in 23, as the state fiscal year was approaching, we wanted to get done by June 30th. We had 5 pairs working. We were going at a pace no one's ever seen in New Mexico, and that's when the state said, oh, well, we have the funding, but we didn't allocate all of it. We didn't think you're actually going to do that much work. So they shut us down. So we're working on that, but those are the kind of things that we're dealing with. So Thanks to our partners, the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources Department, State Forestry Division, as the ones that oversee the sale and permit it and handle the funds, and then Miller Timbers, our contractor, and I was gonna leave space for questions, but I'm a minute and 40 seconds over. Dadgummit.
You got a few minutes, go for it.
Did you have or have you had any problems with insects? Because
Yes.
the Santa Fe National Forest was devastated by boars.
So we got some anyway, just as a backdrop. We got drought stress, we got insects, we got everything else, mistletoe. My hope is, a couple answers here. Once we give trees less neighbors and access to more resources, I'm hoping that they'll be better to withstand drought stress and insect attacks. That remains to be seen. I anticipate additional mortality through some wind throw, because as we expose those trees without their neighbors, a few will blow over. But what we found is with our log decks, we could not get enough log trucks in and out of the ranch to handle these just miles of log decks. And that was the source for the Ips beetles. They'd come in there, the state entomologist came and said, well, you probably got to about June 28th, June 30th for these suckers hatch. And we tried to get them out, but we just couldn't, just too many. So insects are indeed a problem.
One of the things New Mexico State was doing, at least a few years ago when my husband was still running the program, was identifying where those insect infestations could happen when all of the conditions were right, and they would go in and zap them. So I know you're working with New Mexico State, and I know, and it was a GIS program that was doing it.
The John T. Harrington Forestry Research Center is in Mora. That's the state nursery in New Mexico State there, and we work closely with them. As part of me, it looks forward to the day when insects are our problem, because that means we're not as worried about wildfires at that point.
So the wildfires help with that, not the wildfires, but
Insects hate wildfires, yeah. That's one way to get rid of them.
I was just curious about the insects.
Yeah, we're just limited, and we got it work in the summer. And that was a hard sell for our department to the ranch leadership, that we need to operate these machines and haul logs out of Philmont in the height of summer program. And any risk management person in here is gonna pucker up a little bit at that notion. And we've worked really hard to make sure nothing comes of it. And we've been doing well on that. We're more self-inflicted damage than our contractors are doing. But we need that ability to work year round. And we've had good support from the administration. Once we finally got them on board, I think this is the largest risk mitigation effort ever undertaken by the BSA on a BSA-owned property. And one of the main reasons I came out here is that we have not done a good job at letting folks know what we're doing. I want to shout from the rooftops what we're doing. All the scouts that come through, we talk in detail about what it is we're doing, because I want them to go back home to their councils and maybe start asking questions. You know, are we doing everything we need to do on our property to make sure it's going to be here for the future? You know, the whole notion of someone did it for me, you know.
It's a shame that we're not making the money on the timber, because, you know, the construction industry is paying premium prices on building supplies, but you're not getting premium prices on the logs from, you know, going into the middleman. The middleman's making the money, and they're selling it to the you know, Lowe's and Home Depot and all the construction.
That's another tough part of it is,
where's the money coming back? It's not
no
coming
one's
back.
buying-
If you're not making money, then it's not good for us, but you gotta get rid of the logs.
and no one wants ponderosa pine, you know, and that's our biggest product, and no one can sell it. So that's an issue as well. Yes, sir.
The one nice thing is Philmont is SFI certified.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Premium price for whatever you do have. Those people from Missouri, I
Well,
I am very interested in your volunteer forester program, and I don't know if many people here know about that, but we actually have volunteer foresters going out there in Philmont weeks at a time and doing programming for kids.
you bet. Get a week of your time as a visiting forester. You get a uniform stipend and you get a staff mug and a staff patch after that week. It's a heck of a deal.
Last question.
What material are you using on the spring mitigation?
Local stuff, generally willows. So we'll cut a lot of willows out of like Rialto Fish Camp to create casting lanes, take those cuttings up. We will plant some of the cuttings, and then the rest we'll weave in. The post we buy, 4-inch sharpened posts we set with hydraulic pounders, and then we'll weave in mud and willows around that. We use junipers a little bit initially, and the folks from Utah State is like, don't be putting junipers in your stream, bro. And it's like, bro, really? No, I'm making all that part up. But yeah, we're going with native issues there. Sorry for running long. I will be around. I'm not going anywhere. We can sure talk. Thanks, y'all.
Lee, thank you so much for being here.